What is up, Maniacs? I am Zach, and I am the Milly Maker Maniac, and we are almost there. We are almost to week one. Could not be more excited. We are going to dive into the main slate today. We're going to go game by game and give you my breakdown on what I think the best games are this week. I think it's very important that you break down each game rather than just looking at individual players and projections. Obviously, that's all important. But the biggest reason why I think it's important to pick games that are likely to go off, I think that's the best way to give you a shot to take down these GPP tournaments, these big tournaments like the Milly Maker, which is why we're here watching the Milly Maker Maniac. And just want to show the evidence on why this is the best strategy. Almost every single week, this is from last season, 2024. We'll start at week 2. Let me pull up my list here. 1 second. All right. In week 2, we had the Arizona Cardinals, where you have 3 players from one team in the top 5 at their position, 4 in the top 10. And you have a couple other single stacks that week. But almost every single week, you're going to see you have at least one double stack that comes out of that week. Week 4, we had a triple stack with Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and Tucker Kraft. One team, 4 players in the top 5. That's 4 of our 9 spots that we have to fill on our roster, filled by one team. You can see that there were some other good games this week, as other good options as well. Baker was QB3, Mike Evans was wide receiver 5, and Cade Otton was tied in 8. Let's jump to week 5. This was a great week for it. You've got 2 QBs with 2 wide receivers in the top 5, and Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 4. Then you got Kirk Cousins with wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3, as well as tight end 6. Again, with both of these, you have at least 3 players in the top 5, and with Atlanta, you've got 4 players inside the top 6 at their position. And really, there's only 0.2 difference between 6th and 5th. So really, you have 4 players. Again, now all we got to do is fill the last 5 spots. We're giving ourselves those outlier outcomes by pursuing these outlier weeks by one offense that happen pretty much every single week. Here's week 6. We got Baker with Sean Tucker and Chris Godwin. There's another double stack there. You also had Garrett Wilson and Lazard double stacked at wide receiver with Breece Hall. So there's 3 players there. You had 3 players from the Ravens that were top 6 at their position. And then you have the Bears as well. Caleb Williams is QB1. DeAndre Swift is running back 6. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 9. And Cole Kmet, tight end 1. All from one offense. See it in week 7. Week 7's not as good, but we got Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, and A.J. Brown from one offense. And then you got Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman, and Mark Andrews at top 5, with Derrick Henry top 7. So again, 4 players, one offense. Week 8, we had 1 double stack. So we had 3 players from one offense with Kirk Cousins, Bijan, Kyle Pitts. Week 9 is a Bengals week. We got a double stack there from Joe Burrow, Chase Brown, and Mike Gesicki. Week 10, we have another Bengals. This is a huge game stack here. Here we have, was a Baltimore and Ravens and Bengals week. You got Joe Burrow, QB1, Chase Brown, running back 1, Chase Brown, running back 3, Jamar Chase, wide receiver 1 with a huge 55 spot. He was the guy you had to have that week because pretty much doubled up everybody else's score. And Tanner Hudson as tight end 3. Now, you could also have had a bring back in this game where you had Joe Burrow, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase with Tylan Wallace. Obviously, that would be kind of an outlier one, but you could definitely have Mark Andrews there, and you got 4 or 5 guys from one game. Week 11 was a great week for double stacks. You had Jared Goff with David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown. JMO was top 10. Jahmyr Gibbs was also top 10. Joe Burrow again. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Chase Brown at RB8. Then you had Matthew Stafford with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Another solid week. And then we got another one. We got a Tua week here in week 12. Tua with Devon Achane, Jalen Waddle, and Johnny Smith. Caleb Williams with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, top 5. Week 13, we have a Jameis Winston week. We got a double stack with Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. You got another Caleb Williams week with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Then we got another Joe Burrow week. Joe Burrow, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase. We had a Sam Darnold week, Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, top 5. Got a Jared Goff week in week 15 with Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Sam Laporta, all top 5. Is this the week they played the Bills? Yeah, they played the Bills, so you could have also came back with James Cook, or you could have gone Josh Allen and James Cook and had Gibbs, St. Brown, and Laporta. Week 16, another Goff lineup. And week 17, we had another Joe Burrow and a Baker Mayfield double stack. So the reality is pretty much every single week we have at least one offense that you're able to pull at least 3 players from that are going to be top 5. In order to win the Milly Maker or to win these GPPs, we need to get basically, in an ideal world, all 9 players top 5 at their position, or at least top 10 to have a chance to take it down. So one of the best ways to do that is attack games and attack offenses by stacking, giving us the best opportunity to hit that outlier outcome. But that outlier outcome happens almost every single week. So if we're pursuing it week in and week out, we're going to hit on it, a few times a year and put ourselves in position to have that big win. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through game by game from how I have my games ranked as the ones that I'm targeting the most. So my number 1 game this week is Cleveland and Cincinnati. I know it sounds crazy to be pursuing Cleveland, but I just think there's too much to like there. So let's start with Cleveland. Why do I like Cleveland? Well, one, they're playing the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals defense was horrible last year. Obviously, they did sign Hendrickson, and he's a beast. He is probably going to get a sack or 2 on Flacco, but the rest of that defense, they just didn't add any more talent. That secondary is awful, and this is Joe Flacco's last shot. He's not going to hold anything back. I think the same thing for Stefanski. I think he knows that he's on the hot seat. They're going to come out aggressive. I think they know that their best shot at winning this game is scoring a lot of points and hoping that they can get a turnover or 2 from their defense. The one thing about Cincinnati's offense, obviously they have amazing weapons in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown, but they have a horrible offensive line. Horrible offensive line against Myles Garrett is not a good combination. So there is a decent chance that there's some turnovers that are in this game just because they can't block Myles Garrett. And I think that actually works in the favor of this becoming more of a shootout. The games that we're looking for, the games that we can put 5 or 6 guys in our lineup that all hit top 5 or at least top 10, come from shootout games. And I think this is the game this week that has the best chance of being a shootout because you have 2 below average defenses with solid quarterbacks. Obviously, Flacco isn't at the same level as Burrow, but he is solid and he's a bit of a gunslinger. And especially since he knows this is his last shot, he has nothing to hold back with. He's gonna go hard. So because of that, I want to pursue Joe Flacco this week. So guys that I would be interested in taking from Cleveland this week, guys that I would stack with Flacco or in a game stack against the Bengals, I have Samson as somebody that I'll mix in. I'll only mix him in on this game stack. If I'm trying to stack this game either with Joe Flacco or with Joe Burrow at the quarterback, if I'm just trying to take pieces from this game, I'll mix him in here and there. I'm not going to mess with Jerome Ford. He was their main guy the majority of the year last year, and he only had 1 game above 20 points, and that was in week 17. That's not what we're looking for. Dylan Sampson, he's a rookie. Obviously, they took 2 rookies this year, but it's very unlikely that Judkins plays. If Judkins plays, then I'm just not going to touch his backfield. But I think Sampson is a guy that could have a big play. I think will be on the field a decent amount. He's an explosive player, and it's definitely a guy that it would be an outlier. Another reason why I like to stack games is because you can get these pieces that are going to be very low owned and have a low likelihood of going off. But when we're building these lineups, it's similar to what we do in best ball. We want to assume the best, right? We want to assume that if we're starting Joe Flacco as our quarterback, we're assuming that offense, the reason that we're starting Joe Flacco is because we think he's going to be top 5 at his position. Hopefully, at 4,900, he doesn't have to be QB1 to be the winning quarterback for us. Like, we can still win the Milly Maker and him be like QB4 or 5 if we get all the other pieces right, just because of how low his salary is. But we want to assume that offense that we're stacking is going to get somewhere around, like, let's say 450 yards and 4 touchdowns. If an offense is going to do that, we want to think about different ways that could be allocated. So in a scenario like that, that means that they're moving the ball well. That can be both in the air and on the ground. So it's very common to see running backs come along with their quarterbacks. We actually see here that in my correlation charting here, that when a QB is top 5, they have a teammate receiver as a top 10 option or a top 10 finisher that week, 55% of the time. They have a top tight end 47% of the time, top 10 tight end, and a top 10 running back 37% of the time. So this shows us, I think a lot of people would assume that the player that you need to stack with is always the wide receiver. But you can see here, it's not always the wide receiver. It's actually almost roughly 50-50 that it's not the wide receiver. Tight end, I love stacking with the tight end, and I definitely would need to mix in running back more than you would think. So when I look at stacking this lineup, if they're going to go off, which I think is very likely, I want to have the piece that's likely to be this top scorer at running back. So to me, Dylan Sampson is that guy in this offense. It's not as clear, and because of that, I don't think you'll see a lot of people have Sampson. So this is a way to get contrarian to the field. People talk a lot about wanting to be different than the field in these big tournaments. And so they're looking at roster percentages, projected ownership, things along those lines. My thought is the goal is to build the best lineup. It doesn't matter how many people own that individual. Obviously, if a lot of people own a certain player or a certain group of players, it's going to be harder to have a unique combination. But I'm not really too worried about that. I'm just trying to build the right combination. So if I think this is the game that's going to score the most points, I want multiple pieces from that game. And I'm going to do it somewhat like a best ball lineup, in which I'm obviously with best ball, I could have 6 players from one team, and then each week, the top 2 or 3 from that team are just automatically going to hit my lineup. Obviously, I don't get to do that in DraftKings, but the way I can do that is by building multiple lineups and putting different combinations of players from that team into my lineup, doing different stacks, single stacks, double stacks, triple stacks, and sometimes even quadruple stacks, the team onslaught. That seems like it's not something that's going to be a winner, but the reality is if a team scores 50 points, which happens a few times a season, or at least, score 40 points, happens a few times a season, lots of times you're going to have 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 players come out of that one game if it's a back and forth game. So that's the type of lineup that I'm pursuing, the type of outcome that I'm looking for, and I'm going to be aggressive towards that outcome. So Sampson is somebody that we'll take from the Browns. At wide receiver, it's pretty much just Judy and Tillman. Those are the only Browns wide receivers that I'll mess around with. And at tight end, I love Njoku this week. I'm also not opposed to Harold Fannin. I will be mixing in Harold Fannin. So I will be doing single stacks, double stacks, and a few triple stacks with combinations of these players. And then in most cases, I'll be doing a bring back where I believe this game is, a 35-40 game, something in that ballpark. That's like the outcome that I'm looking for. And I understand that's not the most likely outcome. But when we are building these, we have to build towards that outlier outcome and not the just like run-of-the-mill average game when we're doing the big game stack. So it's important to just have that optimistic outlook because it does hit. I showed you with my correlation charting, it hits pretty much every single week where a team has multiple players in the top 5. Week 4 is one of the best ones to see. Like Jordan Love, 2 top 5 receivers and the top tight end. It's a perfect example. That's the type of outcome that we are pursuing. All right, let's look at Cincinnati, players that will pull from Cincinnati. Obviously, we got Jamar Chase at wide receiver, but Joe Burrow at QB, Chase Brown at running back. We don't have to mess with anything there. And we got Chase and Higgins. Like, that's pretty straightforward. Those are going to be the main stacks. Obviously, those are going to be popular players, but I doubt there's going to be too many teams that stack all 3 of these. There's probably going to be a lot of people that play these players solo, and I'll do some of that too. I'll be mixing them into other lineups as well, but I like the big stack here. I mean, I showed you guys multiple weeks with Burrow where they had, I think, week 12, 11, yeah. Here's one where all 3 of those guys were top 10. Here's another week where 2 of those 3 were top 10 and then randomly, or top 5, and then Tanner Hudson was mixed in there. Here's another week where it was Burrow, Chase Brown, and Gesicki. So, like, those different combinations of those guys are likely to hit. So I want to mix in different combinations of those guys. When Burrow goes off, we're assuming that Burrow's having that 350 yards and 4 touchdown game. If he has that, these are the guys that are most likely to get a piece of that. I also want to mix in that, a Mike Gesicki here. I'm not really going to mess with Noah Fant. I might throw in a little Yosevas, but really this is the core group of guys that I want to build off of in these lineups. So different combinations of these guys. You might even do a onslaught with all 5 of these guys. So that's my number 1 game of the week. I just think it's 2 below average defenses with 2 aggressive quarterbacks. And I think another thing too about Cincinnati is last year they kind of came out of the gates slow and they realized that their defense was bad. And so they kind of changed tactics. And also Jamar Chase had been holding out. So they weren't in a good rhythm early in the year. As the season went on, they really balled out and were more aggressive early because they knew they were going to have to score a lot of points with their defense being so bad. I think this year they're going to be more aggressive in trying to get a quick start. They've had issues losing games early in the seasons as well. So I think they're going to be hyper aggressive to combat that. And that just, to me, is a recipe for a big shootout game. Another thing that's interesting about this is I'm actually not out on the Browns as a defense, because one of the things to think about with defenses, especially in GPP, is you want to be facing a lot of pass attempts. On a run play, a defense can really only score fantasy points by a fumble, right? So there's really only one outcome where they can get points. On a pass play, you can get a pick, you can get a sack, you can cause a fumble. There's multiple ways to create fantasy points. And when you are, I think it's very likely that Cincinnati drops back 40 times in this game. And with an awful offensive line against Myles Garrett, I think there's some sacks. There's likely some turnovers. A game scenario that I think would play out really nicely, actually, for the Joe Burrow being the top scorer, is early in the game, he throws a pick six or has, a sack fumble. It's a scoop and score. And all of a sudden they're having to chase. If Cleveland if Cleveland gets the ball, gets out to a fast start, scores a touchdown, and then Cincinnati turns it over and they score again, whether it's pick six or they put more points on the board, I love a scenario in which Joe Burrow is chasing. That's going to lead to that exact game that we're looking for. So I'm not opposed to actually having the Browns against Burrow, or even have Flacco and the Browns D on the same team. I'm not going to do that in all my lineups, but it's not something I'm completely opposed to. Same thing kind of goes for the Bengals. Trey Hendrickson obviously is a top pass rusher as well, and the Browns' offensive line is also probably going to struggle a decent amount this year. But they're at 3,600, so I'm probably going to fade using the Bengals much this week just because they're too expensive. So that is my top game. My second game that I have is the Buccaneers and Falcons. This is the second game that I'm targeting. Let's go over here and find that. So we'll start with Tampa Bay. This game, both times they played last year, was quite a shootout. Let's actually go and find that game over here. It was still Kirk Cousins time, so it was a little earlier. So this was let's see what the Falcons, who they were playing on that week. Back a little bit further. Here it is. I believe this is the week they played. Yeah, this was Falcons Bucks. So QB1, wide receiver 2 and 3. See, I thought we had some comeback. Yeah, Mike Evans was top 9 as well. See if there's any other bringbacks. Nope, just looks like just Mike Evans was top 10 there. But again, we could have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys from one game. So that's, I think, a likely outcome. I think both defenses are going to struggle again this year. You have 2 quarterbacks that I like a lot. Michael Penix obviously is young, but I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to have that gunslinger mentality. I think they're going to push the ball down the field. I just have a hard time believing that they are worse than what they were a year ago with Kirk Cousins. They pull up the team breakdown here. We can look at where they were last year. So last year, in total fantasy points, they were 13th with Kirk Cousins at the helm. I just have a hard time believing that that's not going to get better with Penix. The team is all in on him being good. They believe in him. I think his redshirt year worked in his favor. And I have them projected as the top 5 fantasy offense this year. I know that I'm very bullish compared to the rest of the market. I just don't see a scenario in which you go from having QB 31, even if Penix is QB 18, which is what I haven't projected at. How does that not help the rest of the offense? Like, I think there's a great chance that Drake London has 1,500 yards this year. I just think he's a beast. And I think that Penix has weapons around him. I think their defense is going to struggle, and they're going to have to score a lot of points to be in games. That division is going to, I think the winner of that division is probably going to have 8 to 10 wins. Like, I think they're going to be hovering around 500. So it'll be competitive games all year. Obviously, in week 1, we're not worried about the whole season, but just kind of an outlook on why I think this is a good offense. I think they are going to have a very successful year. In this matchup, there's nobody that scares you for Tampa Bay on their defense. Their defense struggled last year. They didn't make too many additions to their defense. They just got some guys healthier, but I still expect them to struggle. Atlanta really struggled in the secondary last year, and they didn't do much to shore that up. They did get a little bit more of a pass rush in the draft, but obviously those are rookies, and this is their first game. So I think this is likely to be a shootout. So guys that I want from this game, I love both Baker and Penix. Another thing about DraftKings and DFS, especially when we're in these GPP, these big multiplayer tournaments like the Milly Maker, I love a pocket passer with solid weapons around them. Because if Baker Mayfield is a top 5 QB, he has to bring people along with him. He's not just creating that. He's not like a Jalen Hurts that can be top 5 QB and nobody else comes with him because he has 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns, right? If Baker Mayfield is QB1, he probably threw for 350 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. That's a lot of fantasy points going to his teammates. So when he goes off and when we're putting him in our lineup, we are saying Baker Mayfield is going to be QB1. That's the scenario we are building. In that scenario, who are the pieces that are likely to come along with him? I will definitely have Bucky in there. I will actually mix in a little bit of Rachaad White. Rachaad White's a guy that could definitely score some rushing touchdown or some receiving touchdowns. He had a 30 spot last year, 25 spot. He had a few games where he went off. I'm not going to have many pieces of Rachaad White, but I'll mix him in here and there. And then at receiver, it is so concentrated. Emeka Egbuka is going to be one of the highest rostered players this week, but rightfully so. I think it's very likely that he gets somewhere between 6 to 10 targets in week 1 and maybe even more. Mike Evans obviously is a stud. He's healthy. This just sets up perfectly for a big game for Baker, and this is all very concentrated volume. It sounds like Cade Otton's going to play as well. He's questionable, but he is practicing again, so he's another piece that I would like to mix in. And this is pretty much it on who I'm going to be mixing and matching in this. With Baker, I'm not going to do less than a double stack. I'm not going to just do Baker and Mike Evans. If Baker is QB1, he's almost always going to have 2 at least top 10 guys come along with him. So I really like Baker and Evans and Egbuka. I think that'll be a pretty common stack. I like Baker, Irving, Evans, Bacon, Irving, Egbuka. I love mixing in a cheap tight end like Otton into my stacks. So I'll go Mayfield, Irving, Otton, Mayfield, Evans, Otton, Mayfield, Egbuka, Otton. I'll do all sorts of different combinations. And that's how I achieve that like best ball type outcome, is because I am building a lot of different combinations on if Baker Mayfield goes off, which is what I'm betting in this scenario, who are the pieces that are most likely going to be top 5 along with him. We're going to have different combinations of double stacks and some triple stacks. The triple stacks is really just kind of coming at a scenario in which where they score like 40 points or so, that real outlier outcome. If that hits, then you can get 3 guys from one offense. Now, I really like this game because I think both offenses can score and score in bunches. And if it turns into a shootout, which is kind of what we're looking for, I really think there's a decent scenario similar to the Browns and Bengals game where you can get 5, maybe even 6 guys out of this one game. So one of the things that's nice about Atlanta is their target share, their touches are pretty concentrated. Bijan is the most expensive running back this week. I'm not really using him outside of game stacks or just stacks with his teams or game correlation plays here because of that price tag. I just think he has to be RB1, and he has to be RB1 by a decent amount of points for him to pay off at that price, which he's definitely capable of doing, but I don't want to have too much of him. A wide receiver, it sounded like Mooney is going to play. So if Mooney is in there, I'll consider him. Drake London is an absolute stud, and I think one of the best values of the week. He's definitely a good cash play as well. I think every single week he's going to get around 10 targets. I think he's going to have a monster year. Penix loves him. Penix trusts him. I just love that combination. So I like the double stack of London Mooney. I like the double stack of Robinson London. I'll mix in a Robinson Mooney. I like this stack here with all 4 of them. I'll mix in a little bit of Ray McLeod, not a ton, but I'll mix in a little bit here and there. And I also will mix in some Kyle Pitts. These are my core plays. On maybe 20% of my Penix lineups, I'll include one of these 2 guys. But the core is these top 4. Those are the guys that I think is the most likely to have some combination of 2 or 3 of these guys that are going to go off. So that is game number 2. Now we're moving on to game number 3, which is the Panthers and the Jaguars. Again, not 2 teams that you think of in the top echelon of the league, but these are 2 teams that I think have below average defenses. I mean, the Panthers were one of the worst defenses in the history of the league last year. They've made some additions and got Derrick Brown back in the middle of that defensive line. He should help out a lot if he's healthy. and is able to play throughout the year. But they're still going to give up a decent amount of points throughout the year. Like, I think their best case scenario is they're like a top 20 defense, but more than likely, I think they're the bottom third of the league, still a defense, which means if they're going to compete, which I think that they will be in the mix towards the end of the year in that division in the NFC South, which we just talked about two of the teams in that division with the Buccaneers and the Falcons. But I think that they're going to be in that mix of being around 500. And if they are, that's because Bryce Young has played well, and he played well down the stretch last year. So let's look at Carolina stacks first. So obviously Bryce Young, good value at QB. Chuba, I'm not going to mess with Rico Dowdle until I see that he's getting volume. I'm assuming that Chuba is going to get a lot of volume this week. I like him. He's one of my favorite running back values of the week. When we go in to look at it, he had some monster games last year. He's got a pretty low floor. I mean, he had some bust games, but for the most part, his floor is around like 15. But boom game of 35, boom game of 20, boom game of 29, boom game of 22. Some floor games, and then 30, 25. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boom games last year, and didn't play in every game. So, and early on in the first game of the season, he basically didn't get any touches. Really wasn't until game 3 that he was like the guy. And once he became the guy, 6 out of, 12 weeks, half the time he boomed. So I like that outcome again, or that upside against a bad Jacksonville defense. There's nothing on their team defense that scares you. So at wide receiver, I absolutely love Tedero McMillan. I love Xavier Legette. I love Xavier Legette less. Like, this is my favorite stack. Young, Hubbard, and Tedero McMillan. Like, that, to me, that's the most likely one that goes off. But I also think that Legette is a very nice piece because Jalen Coker's on IR. Renfro, I think, is actually going to play, but I'm not going to go after somebody week 1 after not playing a full season. He got cut. If it wasn't for Coker getting hurt, he wouldn't be there. So really, wide receiver-wise, it's McMillan and Legette. I'll mix in a few different combinations of this, but Legette is a guy at 4,200. I don't think it's extremely likely he goes off, but I don't really see a scenario in which he gets less than 6 targets. So at 4,200, there's value there, and he has some big play upside. He could definitely be a guy that looks like a random hit, but if you're building a Carolina lineup and you add him to it, say I add him to roughly 20% of my Bryce Young lineups and he goes off, I'm going to have some real nice lineups compared to the field because he's not going to be a highly owned player. And then a tight end, I think where a lot of the Jalen Coker targets are going to be split between Legette and Sanders. So I like Sanders a lot at 2,900. Be mixing in different combinations of these guys. Again, the obvious ones and the ones that I think are the most likely to hit are Young, Hubbard, and McMillan, but I'll mix in different combinations, including Legette and Sanders as well. Now, on the other side, on Jacksonville, obviously we got Trevor Lawrence, a quarterback. He has not been a very good fantasy quarterback in the past, but I believe in Liam Cohen being the difference maker for him. Now, their running back room is obviously very convoluted and not clear, but the two guys that I'll mix in these stacks that I think will give me a lot of leverage on the field are either Etienne or Tank Bigsby. I think later in the year, Tootin will be somebody that will be playing, but I just don't think I think maybe he gets somewhere around 4 carries this week. I don't anticipate him being in the mix much early on. I think they'll work him in throughout the year. I think Etienne is the most likely to have a big game, but Bigsby is also going to get touches, so we'll mix him in a little bit as well. Now, their targets, we have a lot of question about where they're all going to go, right? I think you can mix in all 4 of these wide receivers. Brian Thomas is going to be one of the most popular plays of the week. Carolina's secondary is trash. He's an amazing wide receiver. People are going to be pursuing him a lot. That doesn't mean we want to fade him necessarily. I think he is likely to have a very big week. I think he's one of the most likely guys to have a top 5 week at wide receiver. So we don't want to run away from that, especially at the price point of 6,800. That's a very attractive price. But Travis Hunter is an explosive player. We don't really know how much he's going to be on the field since he's going back and forth between defense, but we'll see. I prefer the Thomas and Hunter stack. It's pretty obvious, though, to have both those guys on there. I'll mix in some Diami Brown and some Parker Washington, though. So I'll have some double stacks and some triple stacks that are going to be pretty contrarian to the field. I think Lawrence and Thomas are going to be towards the high end of ownership percentage, but I'll be getting leverage on the field by mixing in guys like ETN, Bigsby, Diami Brown, and Parker Washington. And if they score 40 points, more than likely one of those guys is going to have a big week that nobody saw coming, and you're getting a lot of value. Oh, and also, we don't want to forget Brenton Strange, too. That's another guy. So Jacksonville's a little bit harder to stack because there's so many avenues to go with it. I think all these guys have the potential to have big weeks. Obviously, Brian Thomas is the one that jumps out at you, and Travis Hunter would be second. But all these other guys, we don't really know what it's going to look like. So let's not run away from not having that knowledge. Let's pursue a little bit of the chaos and mix in some of these lower-owned guys that could go off in this new Liam Cohen offense. All right, my next game might surprise you a little bit. I am going to go, my game number 4 that I like to go off is San Francisco and Seattle. My thought process behind this, San Francisco lost a lot of veteran leadership on their defense. They still have Bosa and Fred Warner, but they were one of the worst run defensive teams last year. You can see against running backs last year, they were 30th against fantasy points, and they have replaced their defensive line with a couple rookies. And I just think that sets up likely for a big game for Kenneth Walker. When Kenneth Walker's on the field, he's one of the most explosive guys in the league. He is healthy this week. It is week 1. He's going to go out. I think he's going to get a lot of volume. And Clint Kubiak is the new offensive coordinator. He is a master at running the ball. Comes from the Kubiak tree. His dad was offensive coordinator for the Broncos. And Gary Kubiak, when they won the Super Bowl 32 and 33, then was the head coach with Houston and came back and won the Super Bowl with the Broncos in Super Bowl 50. But they know how to run the ball. I think that this is a huge mismatch. Kenneth Walker is maybe my favorite running back on this slate. I think he is very likely to go top 5. He is very explosive. He could have that outlier week in a 5,900. That is a great value. So I will have a lot of Kenneth Walker. I think I'm going to have him in my cash lineup. I just think that there's a big mismatch there. Now, Seattle's defense, I think, will be pretty solid. But if my theory is correct and Kenneth Walker has a big game, that means that San Francisco is going to have to be throwing the ball to get back into it. Obviously, they have some really exciting fantasy pieces in Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and even Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings. So they have talent. And this game is a very important game, even though it's week 1. It's going to set the tone for the season. And I think that Brock Purdy is going to have a big year. I think he's ready to take that next step. He's got a healthy guys around him right now, besides all his backup wide receivers and backup running backs. But the key guys are there right now. And I think that if Walker gets off to a hot start and is tearing them up, that it could turn into a shootout very quickly. I also am going to have some Sam Darnold lineups. Sam Darnold threw 35 touchdowns last year. 35 touchdowns. And we're acting like he's some scrub. I understand that he was in a good system with Kevin O'Connell and had great weapons in Minnesota. But you have to be a good quarterback to throw 35 touchdowns. I think he's going to have, 4 or 5 spike weeks this year. Let's look back at his year last year. There's a spike week. There's a solid week. There's a big spike week. There's a solid week, a solid week. Look at all these 20 spots. I think he's going to have 5 of those. Through 36. I said 30. Oh, I think he threw 1 in the playoffs. So 35 during the regular season. But he's going to have some games, and he has some solid options. Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be, I think, a top 12 fantasy wide receiver this year. He's going to have some big games. This is my favorite stack when I'm doing the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Sam Darnold. Cooper Kupp, I think they brought him over in a lot of ways for play action pass and run blocking. Like, he'll have some big plays, but I think he's really lost a step. Listening to Matt Harmon on Reception Perception, charting all his stuff last year, he had a huge drop off in the second half of the season last year in his separation rates. I will mix him in, but I don't think he's going to have a big year, but he could have a big week. And then the other one that I love is Torrey Horton here. Let's see if we got any news on his. Last I heard, they're expecting him to play, but at 3,000, he's one of my favorite dart throws. These are the guys that I mix in. I actually am not really interested in Arroyo or Barner. I just don't think that that's really going to be how they move the ball. I might mix them in, and maybe one each just to make sure that I'm covering that base. But for the most part, these are the guys that I want. And when I do a triple stack, this is going to be my triple stack. Now let's go over to San Francisco. Purdy's a good value this week at 6,200. He might end up being my cash quarterback. We'll see. But McCaffrey is 7,300. Yes, please. This will be the last time we see McCaffrey at 7,300 this season. He's been looking great in camp. The drumbeat has been solid. I think he's going to be an absolute stud while he's healthy this year, and I hope he's healthy year-round. If he's healthy all year, then I think they'll be a Super Bowl contender. This is a crazy value. Ricky Pearsall at 4,500, way underpriced. I think it's unlikely he has less than 6-7 targets. Like, he could have a lot of targets. He's had the whole training camp to build rapport with Purdy while Jennings was out. I will still mix in Jennings. He will be very low rostered, I believe, because he hasn't been practicing with the calf injury and the contract dispute. But Purdy trusts him in big spots. He's a chain mover for him. I think he will still be mixed in. But yeah, I probably won't play these two guys together. I'll probably mix and match them in different stacks. And then obviously a tight end, we got George Kittle. So my preferred stack with these guys is actually a triple stack with either Pearsall or with McCaffrey, Pearsall, and Kittle, or Jennings, Kittle, and McCaffrey with Purdy. And I'll mix in some without McCaffrey. But the thing about McCaffrey is he's likely to score, just as likely to score a passing touchdown or a receiving touchdown as he is a passing touchdown. So him and Purdy correlate very well. If McCaffrey has a big game, and if Purdy has a big game, really, you can almost guarantee that McCaffrey is going to be in that 25-point range. Like this game a lot, we'll definitely be doing some game stacks and be pulling it into other games as well. Game number 4. So these are like my top tier, the first 4 that we've gone over. 5 and 6, I'm intrigued in, but I'm not going to go as hard on those games. Let's see where we at. And that is Miami and Indianapolis. Now, I think Indianapolis's defense will be about middle of the road, but Miami is just a really easy team to stack, so I don't ever really want to avoid them in weeks until, Tua is not playing. But when Tua is playing, he's cheap, and you know where the ball's going to go. It's basically these 4 guys, or these 3 guys. Like, nobody else really is going to touch the ball in that offense. I will mix in a little Malik Washington, and I'm not going to touch Waller yet. I got to see it. So these would be the people that I'm stacking with. But really, it's these top 4 guys that are going to be mixed in. This is my favorite stack with Achane, Waddle, and Tua. That's the one I'm going to be playing the most. Vibes are weird with Tyreek. And I understand that just overall vibes are weird with the Dolphins. But I mean, let's go back and look at some of their weeks last week when Tua was healthy. Like, let's see. Here we go. Here's a Tua week. Tua, Tyreek, wide receiver 5, Jonnu, wide receiver or tight end 7. Here's another 2 a week. QB3, RB6, wide receiver 3, tight end 2. Concentrated targets. I think that might have been. He missed, obviously, a big chunk of the year. Early in the year, week 1, he was QB9, but you had HN and Hill were both top 5 in 1 week. So very concentrated for Tua. So because of that, when he's healthy, I'm going to be playing him in lineups, even though I don't necessarily think that Indianapolis is a bad defense. I think they're more middle of the road. But the other thing about Miami is their defense, I think, is going to be really bad. Their secondary in particular, they just have nobody. They have no studs in the secondary at all. Their defensive line is decent. I still think that, obviously Taylor can go off. I'm probably not going to bring Jones in. This is the first time I'm not going to have any stacks of my quarterback. I'm more going to be mixing between these 4 guys. Not Pierce. So I want Downs. Looks like they took the Q tag off of Downs. All right, sweet. So Downs is looking like he's going to play. I think he's a great value. I think all these guys are great values. So I will be mixing these guys into multiple lineups. I think Downs actually is the most likely to have the biggest week. I also like Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is in a better situation with Daniel Jones, much better situation because he's not getting sniped at the goal line and he's going to get more consistent work, even though he had 300 carries last year, solid year. But down the stretch, when Richardson was out, is when he had bigger games. 28, 30, 42, 30, 22. Yeah, like a lot of big weeks. So he's definitely somebody that we don't want to fade really in any week, and Miami's not a team that we're scared of. So these are the guys that I want to mix in. I just don't see Daniel Jones, I don't see him being a top 5 guy. And there's other guys in this price range that I do think could be top 5. I think he could have, a top 15 day and facilitate these guys having big days, but I don't really see, him having that 304 game that other guys in that range can have. So we're just going to go with position players from this game. All right, the next game that we have is actually the highest point total for the week. That's as far as the Vegas odds go. It's the Lions and the Packers. Obviously, the Lions were one of the best offenses in the league last year. Green Bay obviously has a much better defense now that they got Micah, but Micah might not play. He has a back injury and he's getting an epidural to deal with that, so he may or may not play. And if he does play, I think they're going to be careful with their new investment since he hasn't been in training camp and has the back injury as well right now. So I think there's a decent chance that he doesn't play too much. And I also think that their secondary is really where their weakness is. So I like Goff stacks this week. Goff is really boom or nothing. We'll go and look back at some of his big weeks last year. But this is really, we could mix in a little Tesla, but really these are the guys that we're going to bring in. But let's go look at some of Goff's big weeks last year. He had a lot of them, so let's see. QB4 there, but didn't bring anybody along with him on that one. Amon-Ra was wide receiver 11 there, but let's see. There you go, QB4, RB8. And too exciting there, but it gets better, I promise. He was clutch in the playoffs. All right, here we go. So we got Goff, 2 top 10 running backs, 2 top 10 receivers. That's pretty sweet. One of the interesting things is it's pretty common in Goff's big weeks for a running back to come along with him. Here's another top 5 week. Didn't have anybody really come along with him that week, but this is where it really goes off. Goff, Gibbs, Amon-Ra, and Laporta all top 5. Goff, Gibbs, Jameson, Laporta, all top 10. Goff, QB9. Gibbs, RB2. JMO, wide receiver 10. Laporta, tight end 7. So when Goff goes off, he brings a lot of people with him. They had a lot of big weeks last year. So I'm not going to completely fade them. I don't think this is the most likely game to go into a shootout, but at the same time, you have two competent quarterbacks. You have a big divisional game. These are the type of game where you could be chasing points in the fourth quarter. They could be a back and forth type affair. Those are the type of games that I like to pursue. This is a stack that I really like. This 4, mixing in Laporta as well. So we could go like this or like this, getting Williams in there. We can take Gibbs out of there. We can mix in Montgomery. We saw some weeks last year where he was involved. I think they're probably going to lean more on Gibbs a little bit this year, so I'm more interested in Gibbs. Another thing about this matchup too is they did just trade one of their best run defenders as part of the Micah trade, so their run defense might not be as strong with Micah. And obviously, anytime Gibbs touches the ball, he's a guy that can take it to the house. So we want to make sure that we're getting plenty of Gibbs in our lineups. Now, the Packers are interesting as well. Love, I think, is another candidate to have that big come up. He could definitely be a guy, I think, that throws 40 TDs. It's not the most likely outcome, but I think it is a possible outcome. Josh Jacobs is a stud. Would definitely want to stack him with Love in a lot of different combinations. Now, Matthew Golden is the lock at wide receiver, and he's a great value. A downfield guy. He's a guy that could have, I think, is going to have a lot kind of polarizing weeks. There'll be plenty of weeks where he's hitting 0 and plenty of weeks where he's getting 20 plus. So we'll definitely want him in our lineups. If he hits the 0, then we have other lineups that he's not in that will work out in our favor. And then we have Jaden Reed. He's dealing with a broken foot, but sounds like he's going to play. He was multiple times last year, was wide receiver 1, very inconsistent. I love Romeo Doubs at this value of 4,300. So I'm going to mix and match these guys in there a lot. And then I love Tucker Kraft. So probably a lot of my combos are going to be one of these 3 receivers, and then either with Jacobs or with Kraft is going to be my most common stack here. And one thing too, just to kind of show what this would look like. Say I want to go with that the Goff side is the QB side. So we'll go with Goff. And in this case, we'll go that it's they take advantage of that secondary. So we'll go his 2 wide receivers. Then on the comeback, we could come back with something like Jacobs and Kraft. Something like that. So now we're saying that this game has, it hits the over. There's 3 or 4 touchdowns scored on both sides, and all of these guys score those touchdowns, and maybe 1 or 2 of them score 2 of those touchdowns. That's an outcome that we could see as a possibility. Like almost every week, there's a game in which there's 6 total touchdowns, 7 total touchdowns between the 2 teams, and somewhere around 700 yards total in those games. If we have those type of outcomes, there's going to be a lot of fantasy points scored. So this is a build where we could go after one of those potential big games. If this game goes off, we're putting ourselves in a really good position to have the right combination. And then all we have to do is fill in 1, 2, 3, 4 positions. If we get 4 other guys right and we got the game right, all of a sudden we have a lineup that can hit that Milly. All right, now the next games, I'm not as intrigued in really. Those are the last ones that I'm going to be stacking in the Milly Maker. The rest of them I'll just be pulling pieces from for the most part. Besides Arizona, where did Arizona go? Arizona plays New Orleans. I'm not really going to stack New Orleans, but another thing I like about Arizona is they're concentrated, so you can get Kyler. You can get James Conner, who's one of my favorite running backs of the week. You get Marvin Harrison, and you can get Trey McBride, and you don't need to do anything else. Like, those are where the concentration is going to go. That's where the big games are going to be. So you can do different combinations of, I really like Murray, Conner, and McBride, or Murray, Connor, and Harrison. I don't really like Harrison and McBride lineups. I think if in most scenarios, if one of them has a big game, it is taking away target share from the other one. So I really like stacking the Cardinals up. From New Orleans, pieces that I will take that I'm not in love with, but you can't ignore Alvin Kamara. He's just going to get a ton of volume at 6,300. And a lot of that's probably going to be receptions. If they score a touchdown, I think he is likely to be the guy to do it. And then Olave and Rashid, I think, are very talented wide receivers, but they have Spencer Rattler at quarterback. So kind of a downside there. Kamara is really probably the only guy I'll be playing from that game, from New Orleans at least. All right, let's just go through the other games now. Las Vegas and New England. I like Drake May on the season, but I just don't think there's just too many good quarterback values in this range that I'm not going to be messing around with him this week. I like Genty, but he's too highly priced compared to all the other running backs. There's just better values. Henderson is the lowest running back that I want to put in lineups. He's just a very explosive player and could have that big touchdown or maybe even two. He catches the ball. I think he's going to get involved early and often. So at 5,500, he's a guy that I'll be mixing into lineups, but I don't really want to stack anything from this. I like Stephon Diggs, but I don't think I think he'll be solid. I think he'll be a better NFL player this year than he'll necessarily be a fantasy player. We'll mix him in here and there, but just not this week. Hunter Henry is somebody we could throw in as well. And obviously Brock Bowers is a solid tight end, but there's other options at tight end that I prefer this week. I think it's unlikely that he's tight end one week one. So pretty much fading this game, except I do actually like the Raiders D. Anytime you have a pass rusher like Max Crosby and a young quarterback, I think that there is a high likelihood for turnovers. So we will pursue that. And Patriots are just a little bit too high price for me. Geno tends to take pretty good care of the ball, so we will pass on that matchup. Let's see. Giants of Washington. Jaden Daniels is QB1 as far as salary. And he's a very good player, but I just don't think this is a week. I very much think that the Giants' defensive line is going to be very good. I think this is going to be a closer game and a lower scoring game than most people think. So I'm not really pulling any pieces out of this besides Malik Neighbors. I just think that Malik is going to get average like 12 targets a week, and he's an absolute beast. And their whole offense is built around him. Dayball loves him, wants to get him the ball. He treats him like a quarterback as far as involving him in decisions and things along those lines. I will definitely be mixing in Neighbors, but he's really the only piece from this game that I'm going to have too much of. I might mix in a little bit of Eckler here and there, but beyond that, I'm not really touching this game. This game, I'm pretty much just playing the defenses. I don't want to deal with anybody on Pittsburgh. I don't want to deal with anybody on the Jets. Justin Fields has some rushing upside, but they have some injuries on the offensive line right now, and you're going up against TJ Watt and that strong defense. This just isn't the week that I'm going to pursue them. Rodgers is he's just old. I think his better days are behind him. A combination of old Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith. No, thank you. I don't want anything to do with this running game. Garrett Wilson is an amazing player, but bad situation. DK Metcalf, he's always somebody that could have that big week, have that big play, but against Sauce Gardner and what I think is going to be an improved defense, it's just not what I'm thinking is the place to be. Mason Taylor is actually a decent one. I think he's going to be their number 2 option in the passing game. So he's somebody you could mix in here and there. Beyond that, though, I like both of these defense. Right now, I have the Steelers in as my cash lineup defense. I think this could be a game where it's like 17-14, 17-13, something like that. Very low scoring. It's the lowest total on the week as well. Tennessee, Denver. If anybody comes out of this game, it's going to be from Denver's side. If I were to do anything with this game, I'm not going to, but really I think this is the only stack that I would really want out of this game is Nix and Sutton. There's no Mims can't have a big game, but just dealing with a groin injury and You just don't know what you're going to get snap-wise. Evan Ingram is somewhat interesting, but I'm not really interested. And then the Broncos D is solid. Cam Ward's first game, tough draw for his first game. I'm going to go ahead and pass on this game. At running back, I think Pollard will have much better spots, but I'm avoiding him this week. He's going to get a lot of volume with Tajay Spears out, but I just don't see how he is a top 5 guy. If he's not a top 5 guy, doesn't have the potential to be a top 5 guy, I'm not interested in him in these big tournaments. He's not going to win the Milly Maker for us. RJ Harvey and Dobbins, I want to see that before I really invest in it. They have a solid offensive line. I think Harvey's going to be pretty good, but I think it's going to be a pretty split backfield early on, and I don't think it's likely that either of those guys are top 5 in week 1 either. Maybe later in the year Harvey will be, but I just don't see it week 1. I can mix in the Broncos D, but it's hard to do at 3,800. So really, I won't have any pieces of this game. And then we have the Rams and Texans. I don't really believe in either of the quarterbacks, not from an NFL standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint. Like CJ Stroud had basically I don't think he had any, maybe 1 top 10 week last year, 2 top 10s, but was trash. Their offensive line is bad. Jared Verse, I think, is going to have a heyday. Really, the pieces that I'm interested in this game, not really messing with Kyron, but these guys you can't ignore. Like, you can't ignore Puka, Nuka, Nico. I mean, Puka, Nico, or Devontae in any week. So I'll sprinkle them in here and there, but I don't think they're great values this week. I think both defenses are going to be solid this week. One good piece of good news is the tackle for the Rams, Jackson, is supposed to play this week, or Jared, I believe. He was dealing with blood clots, but they're saying he's going to play, so that is definitely a positive for the Rams. But yeah, Puka and Nico are the two that obviously can have big weeks, but I think it's unlikely that this is a week that either one of them is like that must-have receiver, even if they are, wide receiver 1 or 2. Like, they have to have a really big week at this price point to be a better value than some of the guys lower that I think are likely to be top 5. So that's my breakdown of the week. Hopefully that was helpful for you. Good luck building lineups out there. Let's go ahead and just build one lineup. We'll go off of our game 1 here. We'll do it. We'll just go right after the studs. We'll go a triple stack with Joe Burrow, and we'll do a comeback with Tillman, and we'll get crazy and throw Fannin in at tight end. 6 guys, 1 game. We are saying that this is a 42-38 type game. This is an absolute shootout going back and forth to 2 struggling defenses and 2 gunslinger quarterbacks. That is the outcome we are looking for. So we have a decent amount of salary remaining. Let's go ahead and actually just pull in a solid defense. Let's go. We talked about Max Crosby versus a young quarterback. Let's go after those potential turnovers there. Let's see what happens. And now we got really 2 solid options at running back and flex. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go Kenneth Walker. And at 7,000, let's go get our boy Malik. Said we would mix him in here and there. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The Bengals beat the Browns 42-38. Joe Burrow throws 5 touchdowns, 1 to Chase Brown, 2. Oops, that was supposed to be Higgins. Uh-oh. We got some work to do now. All right, we're calling an audible. Oh, I know who I'm going to go. Here. It's Chuba time. All right, so here is our scenario. And one thing, too, a good strategy is always put in your flex somebody that is playing in the late game. So we'll put Chuba in at running back, and then we will put Walker in at the flex. They have the afternoon game. So if I need to do a late swap, I can do so in the flex. I can have more options there. This isn't really a lineup where that would really make sense. Like, it's either going to be dead in the morning or it's going to be looking really good and I'll still want Walker in there. But there's scenarios where late swap can save a lineup or two by either going contrarian or going after the chalk if you had a good morning and you're just trying to go for a cash or give yourself the best opportunity to take it down. But yeah, in this lineup we built, we're saying that this is, 42-38 game. Burrow throws 5 TDs, 1 to Chase Brown, 2 to Jamar Chase, and 2 to Higgins. Both these guys are top 5. We're wide receiver 1 and 2. Chase Brown is maybe running back 5. Chuba goes for 150 and 2 TDs against Jacksonville in another game that's a shootout, but Hubbard is the highest scoring player to come out of that game. And then in the guys that score touchdowns for the Browns, Harold Fannin in his first NFL game has 4 touchdowns for 50 yards and 2 TDs, four receptions for 50 yards and 2 TDs. And Tillman gets in for 6 catches, 120 yards, and a TD, and is a great value of 4,400. Even though our boy Flacco throws for 3 TDs, they still lose, but they lose in fashion by winning us $1 million. Kenneth Walker runs for 150 and has 2 TDs against that bad San Francisco defense at home against a division rival. They go off. And Max Crosby causes a sack fumble, which is scoop and scored. And the Raiders are the number 1 defense on the week. There it is, my friends. There's the story. There is $1 million in our lineup. All right, my friends, I appreciate you. Good luck this week. Enjoy week 1. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Like and subscribe, tell your friends, and enjoy the week. Good luck, my friends.